Hi, very good morning, and I hope everyone is well and in good spirits. So, these are quite trying times that we are in, but I'm very thankful we can still have this opportunity to have this engagement. And I sincerely want to thank you for taking the time to join me for this session today. So, just a little bit about myself before we begin. My name is Sharon. I'm based in Singapore and I'm part of the Cybersecurity Solutions Group within Microsoft. So, in particular, I look at the threat protection stack of solutions and technologies, as well as Azure Sentinel, which we will talk about in much greater detail today. So, the topic that we want to cover in the next few minutes is about modernizing your SIEM in the cloud with Azure Sentinel. So this is one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about because security information and event management, or SIEM, is a very powerful technology that's so central to your security operations. It's really the core that does intensive analysis and facilitates workflows. And it's also where your analysts are going to be spending the majority of their time identifying, investigating, and mitigating threats. So the SIEM really is the overarching fabric that ties together all your different technologies, your processes, and your people together. And so that brings us to the topic for this particular session, where we really want to talk about how all of this needs to be modernized in the cloud, just to keep up with your current state of change. So the key driving factor for all of this really is your expanding digital estate. So it is increasingly difficult to define a physical boundary around your environment simply because of the exponential growth in your devices, BYOD, IoT. There's also increased collaboration and constant exchange and consumption of data within your organization and with third parties. And so what happens is not only do you have more signals and a more complex situation to monitor now, you also start to implement more security technologies and control points. And these solutions also generate signals and alerts, very often without taking additional context from each other. So what you end up with is many false positives, and alert fatigue starts to build to a point where it negatively impacts your security operations. Because as you can see, almost about half of these alerts will never be investigated and are often overlooked. And so that's why we decided to design and launch Azure Sentinel, a 100% cloud-native SIEM. So we set out to achieve three key objectives. Firstly, we want to deliver instant value to your SOC. So Azure Sentinel is not only quick to deploy, it also has many features and content that's built in and designed to accelerate threat identification and investigation. And I will show you these different modules when we pivot into the portal later on. Right, so for those of you who have kind of gone through the process of implementing a SIEM, would know it typically takes about 6 months to a year or more to design, install, and deploy your SIEM infrastructure, like implementing these servers and all of that, right? And it just takes such a Herculean effort to bring it to operational steady state and maintaining it from there on. So with Azure Sentinel, we entirely remove that scope from your SOC, and we manage all of that for you. So that actually frees up capacity in your SOC to focus on what really matters, which is, of course, your threat detection. Now, secondly, we're also able to support your growing real estate, right, of digital assets. So traditional SIEMs are pre-designed to handle up to a certain amount of data ingress and processing load. But as we move to a cloud era and workloads become more dynamic and elastic in nature, the SIEM needs to be able to scale up and down when necessary. And it doesn't make sense to prepare redundant capacity for these infrequent and sometimes unforeseen bursts. So with Azure Sentinel, you won't have to worry about how this backend is going to scale dynamically to meet your needs at that point in time. And neither do you have to pay more than what you actually want to consume. So that's really helpful in the cloud world where workloads can sometimes become very unpredictable. So lastly, there is a strong focus on utilizing machine learning, AI, and automation to improve your overall SOC effectiveness. So depending on where you are on your data analytics journey, you can choose to leverage our built-in Microsoft curated machine learning models, or you could even bring your own algorithms and methodologies. And also with automation, you can implement workflows to reduce the amount of manual tasks your analysts are doing, or to quicken response by taking swift action to contain the threat. So ultimately, Azure Sentinel is positioned to be an end-to-end solution for your security operations throughout the entire lifecycle, from the point of data collection to detection, analysis, then on to investigation and response. And it's also an ongoing collaborative process between our security experts and the open community. So you can do a quick search for Azure Sentinel GitHub, and you will see our repo and all of the contents in there. So now let's get into the 10 steps to modernizing your SIEM. Now the first component we want to talk about is visibility. So one thing we do notice is that a lot of enterprises are familiar with ingesting traditional on-prem log sources. So when you think about log collection, you think about things like your servers, your network switches, routers, your perimeter protection technologies, right? Your firewalls, your IPS, things like that. But what about cloud visibility? Whether it's IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS, right? Very often we overlook all of the data and logs that reside there as well. So it's really important to evaluate and have a good sensing of what exactly you have, where they are, and how you can keep tabs on them. So with Azure Sentinel, we have collectors to ingest data from any source, be it on-prem or in the cloud, first party or third party. And of course, we do take in Azure and M365 data. In addition, there are collectors that can ingest things like syslog and Ceph. So this could be from the endpoint itself or a centralized syslog server. Now you can also ingest threat intel through various means, and more notably, this includes TIX and TXI, which is kind of the predominant format. And of course, APIs, which are increasingly being used to ingest logs from cloud applications. So all of this data can be fed into Azure Sentinel for storage and for search and for analytics purposes. And so now that you've brought all of your data in, one of the features in Azure Sentinel is actually workbooks. It's a very powerful way for you to interact with your data, because it's more than just static reporting that we're very used to in traditional SIEMs. With workbooks, you can actually filter, pivot, drill down into your information, and use all these various visualization modules to make sense of your data. So now I'll just move straight into the demo so that you can take a look within our portal, how it looks like. So when you click into Azure Sentinel, this is the main portal page that you will be seeing. Now, if you click into the left blade that says Data Connectors, what you will see are all the different types of connectors that we have within Azure Sentinel. So of course, this includes our Microsoft ecosystem, which includes things like your Azure AD, Azure Activity. You'll even have things like your Office activity inside. So that includes things like email and SharePoint, OneDrive information. Now, aside from that, we also support other clouds as well. So that includes Amazon Web Services. Now, if you wanted to bring in your CloudTrail logs into Sentinel, you can. So it's just a matter of clicking into the connector page and following the instructions that have been specified so that you can start collecting and ingesting all of that data. And you will be able to see, for example, how much data you are bringing in over time. Now, aside from these sources, what you also will be able to see are things like your security solutions, be it Barracuda, Checkpoint, Symantec. Most of the common ones we will include here, and this is an ever expanding and growing list. So we will continue to keep adding these connectors within our portal. But don't worry if you don't see your particular solution being listed explicitly here, because we support formats like Ceph and syslog. Right? So that basically will enable you to bring in the majority of the information out there, because these are such prevalent formats in log ingestion today. Right? So bringing your data in through, for example, a centralized syslog server or directly into here via syslog is also entirely possible. So once you have all of that data coming in, you can pivot into workbooks to start interacting with your data, doing data visualization. And because all of these are entirely customizable, what happens is you can purpose them to do whatever it is that you prefer and you intend to do. So it could be things like this, right? Let's say I wanted to look into my DNS activity, and you can see, for example, I can pivot this across the last 5 minutes to 14 days to, let's say, 7 days, and all of the information will correspondingly change, right? So you can choose the different types of visualizations you want to use. If I click on edit, basically this is where you can start to choose different things and reconfigure all of your queries. So they all run KQL queries in the back, and basically it's a matter of you deciding how you would like to visualize your data. So I can do simple, for example, time series analysis or a pie chart here. Or if I wanted to do something a bit more complex, let's say a drill down. Let me zoom out for a bit so you can see this better. Now let's say I wanted to see what are the top domains that are being queried. And on the right, I'm seeing the number of unique domains being queried over time. Now let's say for this specific domain, I wanted to see how it was being queried over time. I can just click into it, and the right side graph actually updates based on what I have clicked on the left. So this is also something that you can configure, and it's really great for doing drill-ins whenever you want to do an investigation and you don't necessarily want all of the information to be static and produced upfront for you. Nor do you want to, let's say, have 10 different graphs showing 10 of these plots, right? You want to be able to click and see it update as and when you want to do that investigation. So this is exactly what workbooks are meant to do and what you can program them to do. So now let's say we wanted to go into logs, and this is where all of the data that you have brought into Azure Sentinel will start to show. So let's say you wanted to look at your Azure activity. This is basically what you'll be able to see within the portal, right? So it's different lines of logs, all of the information being populated inside. Depending on the different log source, you will see different things showing up. Now, one thing that I did want to show is something that we typically avoid doing within on-prem SIEMs, just because it's very tricky to use wildcards in on-prem SIEMs. But for example, here I wanted to show you just how fast a query can run within Sentinel because we're using the cloud, right? So this basically is about 300 million lines of logs, and we managed to run this simple query in 3 seconds, right? If you try to use a wildcard on, let's say, your on-prem SIEM, you are going to consume so much compute, and the system is going to take forever to run that query, right? So for us, it's really simple. You can just bring your data in and start interacting, start querying, start using them as and how you will. So the next component we want to talk about is analytics, right? And so within Azure Sentinel, we do provide you many built-in rules. Now you can, of course, customize these rules yourself as well, but it's really great that we can give you a set that you can just out of the bat enable and start with, just to have a quick sensing of how Azure Sentinel works and what exactly you can detect within there. So we have, of course, things like threshold-based rules, which are fairly standard throughout the SIEM market, but we also go above and beyond and provide things that are heavily based on data analytics and data science. So you will see quite a few of the queries actually do things like baselining across 14 days. We will take a look at anomaly detection, time series decomposition, things like that. So it can range from a fairly simple rule to something a bit more complex, depending on, of course, your use case and your environment. Now, I will talk a little bit more when we pivot into the portal later on, but you will see, for example, a few different types of rules that we have, and some of that includes even our Microsoft Threat Intelligence that we will showcase within there. Now, in addition to that, like we spoke about earlier, we do provide you built-in ML capabilities. Now, depending on whether you want to just use our built-in models or you want to bring your own models as well, that's also entirely possible. So what we're able to do within there is to help you reduce the amount of false positives that you are seeing in your SIEM, and also to do cross-source correlation. So that's a really powerful feature. Now, a lot of what we're seeing today in SIEMs is single source correlation. So it's a lot of deduplication. It's a lot of let's consolidate, for example, 3 times failed login within 5 minutes. So it doesn't really take into context what else is happening in the ancillary environment. Now let's take a look within Azure Sentinel to see what exactly we can do. So when you pivot into the analytics blade, what you will see under role templates are all of the different rules that we provide. So the two key types of rules that I wanted to focus on here are, for example, when you see things like known phosphorus, known iridium, thallium, all of these strange element names, these are essentially threat actors and attacker groups that our threat intel team is actively tracking. So any of the known IOCs and techniques that are being used are actually going to be populated inside this rule. So whenever you are alerted on these rules, it means that some of these IOCs have actually been found within your environment. And so that naturally is a cause for concern, and you should start your investigation from there. Now, the other thing that we do provide is, like we mentioned, Fusion. So within Fusion, as you can see on the description on the right, we actually provide about 35 different types of models that are running behind this single rule that you can enable. So what happens is we'll be able to look across your environment. We do a baselining, we will learn what exactly is your environment like. And from there, these different models that are trained to specially identify particular attacks and portions of the kill chain, you will see, for example, I should have it open here, how we can look across different solutions to identify something that is malicious and probably even more advanced than a typical simple attack. Right, so what you see here is, for example, a network request to a Tor anonymization service that was detected, I believe, on Defender ATP. So that's our EDR solution. And also you will see anomalous activity being detected by Palo Alto Firewall. So what happens here is that we are seeing that there is a correlation between an outbound traffic from your endpoint, and this was corroborated against, for example, anomalous activity that we are seeing within Palo Alto at your firewall level. So from there, you can start your investigation, and we will talk a bit about investigations later on. But basically what you can start to investigate and pivot into is to see the entire breadth of the attack, to see who else has been infected. Basically, it's to identify the blast radius, what assets have been impacted, who has been impacted, doing a post-mortem to understand how this happened in the first place and what you should do next, which is the automation and response portion of this. So that's it. We can move into the next section, which is hunting. So with hunting, right, it's another thing that SOCs haven't actually had the time or resource to really get into, just because they've been so bogged down by all the alerts that they have to react to. There hasn't been the time to proactively hunt for threats. But what we do want to enable SOCs to do is actually to have a quicker way to embark on this process, to search for more stealthy and low and slow signs of compromise, to essentially reduce the dwell time of an attacker in your environment, right? So when you free up more time in doing things like investigations, false positive checks, and validation, you can have your analysts invest more time into doing things like these, such as hunting and looking for particular maybe IOCs or attack techniques and attacker groups that may be more relevant to your industry and your enterprise. So within the hunting page, you can actually use something called bookmarks and live stream to help you manage your hunts. So with bookmarks, what you're essentially doing is to pin notable pieces of data, and you can basically see how all of this falls into place with respect to, say, a broader attack campaign and the overall kill chain process. And if, let's say, for a particular activity, maybe I suspect that a particular endpoint is compromised and I want to monitor live whenever it does a certain thing, maybe whenever it calls a certain process or it pings a certain IP, I can do this in live stream and watch live how this particular event is happening, how often. And this is not retrospective analysis, this is live streaming and monitoring. So another great feature that we also provide is something called Jupyter Notebooks. So what Jupyter Notebooks can help you achieve is really a programmatic way to codify your security operations, basically to ensure that you have a standardized approach in investigating threats, and also to reduce the need to pivot across different places to get all of your data in. So this ensures also that when, for example, analyst 1 goes off shift and analyst 2 comes in the next day or in the next shift, you know that they will be investigating threats in the same way. It provides that sense of continuity. Or let's say when there's turnover between your analysts, how do you make sure that analyst 1 investigates the same way as analyst 2 and that all grounds are going to be covered? So if you are able to codify your process for investigations, for example, let's say when you receive a certain alert, what are the typical checks that you will run through? Do you go to virus total? Do you put this into your sandbox? Do you start searching across your environment to see how many times I have seen this particular file hash in my enterprise across the world, and so on, right? So basically all of these different thought processes can be translated into code. And so aside from all of this, what you can also leverage are the other libraries within, let's say you're using Python, or even if you're using R, you can use things like TensorFlow, scikit-learn, and all these libraries have different, for example, visualizations that you can leverage, or pre-built models as well. So that's really powerful for the SOC. So let's go into the demo piece to kind of take a look at what that would be like. Let me zoom out here. So in the left pane, if you click into hunting, now what you'll see is that we've provided quite a few of the inbuilt hunting rules here. So hunting rules are basically things that look anomalous and might be a cause for concern, things that you may not constitute a high alert or high confidence and high impact kind of symptom, but it is something that might signify something that is brewing, right? So it's kind of trying to move into the earlier stage of the MITRE attack as well, trying to understand and catch an attacker earlier on in the process. So just by clicking on run all queries, you can actually see we are running through every single query here, right? And this is exactly what is being run. You can see it, it's transparent to you. So you'll see the results starting to show. So for example, if I am interested to see why a user has actually initiated an audit activity, and a rare audit activity at that, right? You can start to click in to view the results to see what exactly is happening. So you can even see things like parent and child processes that are being run. So least common parent and child processes across your entire enterprise. This could also be a cause for concern, especially with the way attacks are changing today. You're starting to see a lot of attackers starting to use what we call live off the land attacks. They are using legitimate processes, trying to compromise these processes and applications within your endpoint to spin off, for example, malicious executables, to run obfuscated PowerShell scripts, or to even do a callback to a CNC, right? So let's say you click into view results. And this is exactly where you can start to see, for example, what the parent-child pair is, how many times I've seen it, the host count as well, and which are the hosts that I'm seeing this run on, right? So it's really powerful in helping you get a start to what exactly might constitute a bigger attack campaign that could be ongoing in your environment. Now, if you were to talk a bit about the Jupyter Notebooks, so it's completely customizable and it's dependent on what you want to achieve with it. So if you wanted to do, for example, simple visualizations, and you wanted to let your security analyst be able to interact with your data, you can start to import all these different libraries and tools that you are comfortable with using, and start to formulate your own hypothesis and develop your own workflow here, basically on how you want them to start investigating, interacting with their data in a very powerful way. So now moving on to the next section about incidents. Now with incidents within Azure Sentinel, it's meant to empower the way your security analysts are doing their investigations. So today the analysts are kind of pivoting across different solutions and different panes. So we do see them spending quite a bit of time and effort moving between the different solutions, trying to dig up the necessary data. And this is quite a cumbersome process. So within Azure Sentinel, what we have provided are things like investigation graph. So this is a great way for you to visually do your investigations, right? So it's easy to, for example, right-click into a certain asset and say, what other alerts have I seen on this asset? Now, for this alert, maybe who else have I seen that has also done maybe anomalous travel? Maybe I would like to see what are the new processes that have started to run on this particular endpoint. If I wanted to do a timeline over all of the alerts that have happened, just so I get a good sensing of what came first, how the attacker managed to move within the environment. If I wanted to see, for example, the scale of impact, right? This is exactly what we want to enable the analyst to do, right? So in a graphical way, it is so much easier to understand what exactly is happening. So if, let's say, before I even move into the portal, just taking a look at this, you can see from a particular user, we have seen multiple different alerts being triggered, like anomalous sign-in, suspicious PowerShell script being run, mass download of data. Now I can see, for example, this PowerShell script is also linked to a particular endpoint or a server, and this server has pinged certain domains and IP addresses. And what else have I noticed that could possibly link these two entities together? Now, in addition to that, we also give you deeper insight into your information by adding in additional little features that really go a long way. So one thing that we do provide is something called URL detonation. So this really helps when your analyst is trying to evaluate things like possible phishing attacks, right? So let's say there's a certain URL that comes in within your logs, and you're not sure whether this is just any other URL, like a legitimate URL, or even if it was malicious, what exactly was it trying to do? Was it just trying to do a drive-by download, or was it trying to fish for credentials? So with URL detonation, you will be able to see for each URL what exactly was the IP of the URL, the IP reputation of this URL, and also what the user was seeing at that point in time. So if, for example, you're looking at something like a Microsoft sign-in screen, that's kind of alluding to the fact that this user probably was trying to be a victim of a phishing attack, versus, let's say, just any other malicious URL, right, that could be doing something else. Right? So let's take a look in the portal to see what that looks like. Close this off. So let's say you move into the incidents page, which you can get to from here, incidents on the left. Now at the bottom right, you will see this thing called investigate. So when you click into it, what happens is it will expand into the graph, where you will see for a particular alert, and all the information will be available here, so the analyst can continue to understand what exactly was happening. And he can see who was the user that was impacted and what was the endpoint, right? So if you have, for example, a URL that was relevant to this incident, you will see another note that comes out that will show you that URL. So you can click into things like related alerts to see what else I have seen on this user. And so I've noticed a lot of base64 encoded Windows executables being run. And let's say on this PC, I wanted to look at what were the parent processes that were running on it. You can click and expand that. Now, even within the processes, let's say I wanted to know who else has been running this process, because maybe this process looks a bit strange to me, cmd.exe, although it's not. But for the sake of this, let's just pivot into this and take a look. So I can see all the different users and basically endpoints that are also running this process. So this will enable me to continue doing my investigations, take a look at what entities, what different types of processes are running. Right, so that was the investigation portion. And also I wanted to show you the URL piece. So this is exactly what you will see whenever a URL comes in. We will detonate it and we will tell you the verdict based on our intelligence, whether it's a good or bad URL. Now let's say you can click into this one, and now you can see it actually shows you a Microsoft login page, right? And it's a beautifully replicated Microsoft login page. And so from this, it's actually quite easy for the analyst to determine that, hey, maybe my user was phished, and I should look into doing things like a password reset, and I should inform the user that, you know, they've done something, go into maybe my emails and start looking at who else has maybe received this link, and quickly soft delete all of those emails or hard delete those emails, and ensure that no one else has clicked on that particular URL. So the last bit we want to talk about is really more on the automation piece. So this is really critical in a SIEM, just because there's a lot of alerts that you will receive that should be acted on immediately without analyst intervention, right? Let's say it's an IOC match. Let's say it's a known malware, it's a known malicious activity. Some of these things, if they are not going to impact, let's say, a critical system or a critical production system, you should think of immediately blocking them, or at least pushing a ticket out to your ITSM system. It could be ServiceNow or something else, right? And so basically, this is the thought process that needs to start happening within security operations centers, right? You want to focus your analysts' effort on doing things that need investigation, further validation, and even then you can use automation to help them with that enrichment process. So for example, playbooks can be used in multiple different ways, right? One, of course, is incident management. So that's simply pushing a ticket out to your central ITSM system. Maybe you received a certain alert that you want the network team to work on, that you want maybe the IT operations team to push out a patch, right? So these are things that can immediately be done through this, instead of, for example, writing an email that goes out and there's no continuity in tracking whether a certain workflow has been closed or not. Now, in addition to that, you can also use playbooks for enrichment and investigation. So let's say an analyst typically has a threat intel database that he does a lookup on, or maybe he goes going to VirusTotal. These are very simple lookups and enrichments that actually take up a lot of your time. You just don't really notice it. So by using playbooks, you can actually immediately get all of that necessary information pulled and populated side by side to the alert, so that when the analyst receives it, he can immediately start doing his investigation and his analysis. He doesn't have to waste time going into all these different portals and data sources to start pulling this information manually by himself. Now, another big thing that we're seeing enterprises starting to do is to send validation emails to users. Now, what happens very often in the SOC is that a lot of these alerts that you received need to be validated by the user. For example, maybe if you're not sure whether a user has traveled, or if this indeed is an attempt from an attacker to sign in to a compromised account from a remote location, you can send a validation email to your user to get them to basically feed back to you whether or not this action was done by them. If it was, they can add in case comments. If it wasn't, you can immediately elevate the severity of this alert, so that you know that the analyst should start looking into this because the user was not the one who logged in. Now, similarly, if it's, for example, investigating things like anonymous IP, now this is very difficult for the SOC team to triage by themselves, just because there's no real way to go in and validate exactly what the user has been doing through a Tor browser or even an anonymizer VPN. So by writing an email that asks for their approval to check did they do this action or not, and if they did, can they add comments about why they are using a Tor browser, what were they doing, and that adds all of this enrichment into your case notes so that your analysts can pick up all these points and decide whether this was a malicious attempt or not. Now, the last piece for automation is, of course, the remediation portion. So this is where we're talking about things like blocking an IP address. Do I want to force a password reset on a certain user? Maybe I want to isolate the machine, cut it off from the network. Maybe I want to trigger a conditional access for a particular user because I have very strong reason to believe that his device has been compromised or his credentials have been compromised. So this is also something that you can do within Azure Sentinel through what we call playbooks. So I'll show you within the portal what that would look like. So if you go into playbooks, and this is a completely modular way in which you can start to create some of these things. Let's see. So for example here, whenever a response within Azure Sentinel is being triggered, this will allow me to start grabbing information about the alerts. And from there, I want to send an email approval, right, to, for example, the impacted user. You can add static content or dynamic content as well. And based on the response, for example, here, I can set a condition loop that says if the user approved it, I will send an acknowledgement and I will close the incident. If, for example, he said he didn't do it, then I will send this follow-up email, right? And from there, you can continue to add further actions. Let's say you wanted to send him a message within Teams, you wanted to use other even third-party technologies. We do have all these connectors here as well. So, or let's say ServiceNow. You can start to create a record, update a record. It's entirely up to your workflow and your SOC process. So now that we've spoken extensively about the 10 different ways in which Azure Sentinel can help you modernize your approach to SIEM, not just within the cloud, but also in your existing context on-prem. Now, we also want to talk a little bit more about the roadmap of where we are going. Azure Sentinel is a relatively new product that has GA reached general availability about half a year ago, right? So we are constantly innovating to improve the system. We want to bring you more and more features that will help you in your threat analytics process. So especially on the right side, you will notice some of the things that are coming soon, definitely your additional data connectors. This includes, of course, more Microsoft services. We want to support Logstash as well. And there will be many, many others, other data connectors to third-party solutions as well. Now we want to add in more built-in detections within Fusion, as well as the other rule-based analytics rules that you will see. We have heard feedback that Microsoft Threat Intel is something that our users are particularly keen on. And so these are definitely going to be a focus area for us going forward. Now, BYOML as well for the users who have existing data analytics projects that they want to bring into Azure Sentinel. These will also be made available soon. Now, threat intel research and basically providing you something like a threat intel platform is something that Sentinel hopes to provide you as well, because we want to be able to aggregate and bring in all your different sources of threat intel, be it from Threat Connect, OTX, or Stix, Taxi, all of those sources, right? Wherever you are getting your threat intel data, it could be your own as well. We want to bring it into a single database where you can basically curate and manage all of these different indicators. Now, entity pages as well, we have a strong emphasis on identifying which, for example, fields are related to users and domains and your IPs. So this is going to help you basically structure the way in which you are interacting with your data, and it'll help with the overall investigation process. So the overall takeaway from today is really to go into your Azure portal and start a Microsoft Azure trial if you don't already have one. Now from there, you can create an Azure Sentinel instance. So Sentinel is actually free for the first 30 days that you turn it on. So just a quick point of clarification, Azure Sentinel sits on top of an Azure Log Analytics workspace. So Log Analytics is not the free component. So that one will still be chargeable, but the Azure Sentinel component that sits on top of it for the first 30 days will be free. So from there, you can start bringing in all of your different data sources. You can start bringing in your Microsoft data, your on-prem data, your syslog Ceph information. And so basically, depending on what you want to see, what are your use cases, you can start ingesting all of this data in, start interacting with your data, doing some threat hunting, test out our analytics rules, and also the response portion. So the response portion typically comes last, but that's also something that's very key that you can try out, get your hands dirty, and basically see how that can help with your security operations process today. So if you want to learn more, you can visit this link here, aka.ms/Azure Sentinel. And with that, thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I hope it was informative for you, and I hope to hear again from all of you soon. Thank you.